Nobody in that Rosemont dining room expected the home nurse to hold her ground. But when Claudine Harbert finally spoke, the woman who had spent 3 weeks trying to erase her went very, very quiet. It started the way most cruelties do. Quietly, with a look not a word. Claudine Harbert had been hired to care for Edmund Voss, 73 years old, recently discharged from St. Michael's Hospital in Ottawa after a second stroke. She arrived at the Voss family home on a Thursday morning in late October, when the maple trees along the Rosemont lane had gone the color of old copper, and the air smelled like wood smoke and coming rain. She carried a canvas bag with her nursing supplies, a thermos of black coffee, and a folder of Edmund's discharge papers marked with color-coded tabs. She had been a registered nurse for 22 years. She had sat with people through the worst hours of their lives. She had held hands that were letting go. She knew how to be quiet in a way that felt like presence, not absence. Edmund's doctor had recommended her specifically. That was the first thing Renata Voss decided she hated about Claudine. Renata was Edmund's daughter-in-law. She had married his son Philip 8 years ago at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake, in a ceremony that was photographed for a regional lifestyle magazine, and framed in the entrance hall of the house she now ran with the precision of a general. She was 41, dressed even on weekday mornings as though she expected to be observed. And she had a way of speaking to household staff that made everything sound like a correction. When Claudine arrived, Renata met her in the front hall, and looked at her the way a person looks at something left on the wrong shelf. "You can leave your bag by the door," Renata said. "We have a spare room at the back near the laundry. That's where you'll change." Claudine said, "Thank you," and nothing more. She had learned long ago that not every opening was an invitation. Edmund Voss was upstairs in his bedroom, propped against pillows, one hand resting on the duvet like a bird that had stopped flying. He had a clear mind inside a body that was learning to disappoint him, and he seemed to understand the weight of that gap. When Claudine came in and introduced herself, he studied her face for a moment before he smiled. "You have steady hands," he said. "I can tell by the way you held the door." Claudine smiled back. "How are your hands today, Mr. Voss?" "Stubborn," he said, "like the rest of me." She liked him immediately. The first week passed without incident, if you didn't count the incident with the medication schedule. Claudine had set out Edmund's morning medications in the order prescribed. Renata had walked in, moved 2 of the pill cups and said, "He prefers them in this order," in a tone that closed the door on discussion. Claudine waited until Renata left, then quietly restored the correct sequence, not to be difficult. Because one of those medications needed to be taken before food and one needed to be taken after, and the order was not a matter of preference. It was a matter of chemistry. She said nothing about it to Renata. The second week Renata began making requests that did not belong to Claudine's role. She asked her to answer the side door when packages arrived. She asked her to take a dinner tray back to the kitchen when the caterers were slow. She asked her to stay an extra hour because she and Philip were going to a function, without asking whether Claudine had other obligations, without asking at all. Just telling. Claudine managed it, because the alternative was disruption, and disruption would unsettle Edmund, and Edmund was who she was there to protect. The third week, Renata began doing something more deliberate. She started talking about Claudine in the third person, when Claudine was standing in the room. "She's moved his reading chair again," Renata said to Philip at dinner, loud enough to reach the hallway where Claudine was washing her hands. "I've told her twice," she said to her sister over the phone, also loud enough. "She's pleasant enough, I suppose, but she has opinions. You know the type," she said to Edmund himself one afternoon when Claudine was just outside the door. "You shouldn't let her fuss too much, Papa, it becomes a habit," Edmund had said, with perfect dry calm. "I find I like being fussed over, Renata. At my age it's preferable to being ignored." Claudine had heard that too. She pressed her fingers lightly against the wall, steadied herself, and went back inside to check his blood pressure. The breaking point arrived on the first Saturday of November. The Voss house was hosting a luncheon. Philip's business partners, Renata's closest friends, a few members of the charitable board Renata sat on. The kitchen was frantic, extra staff had been brought in. White tablecloths had been ironed with a precision usually reserved for surgeries. There were flowers in the hallway that cost more than Claudine's grocery bill for the month. Edmund had had a difficult morning. His left hand had trembled more than usual. He had been disoriented briefly when he woke, which sometimes happened, which was not alarming but required steadiness and patience, and the particular kind of quiet attentiveness that Claudine had spent 2 decades learning to offer. She had stayed with him through it. She had spoken to him in her even, unhurried way. By 10 in the morning he was settled. By 11 he was reading. By noon he looked like himself. Claudine was coming down the back staircase with an empty water pitcher when Renata appeared at the base of the stairs with 2 of her guests beside her. "There's the nurse," Renata said, to no one in particular, in the tone of someone narrating a museum exhibit. Claudine stopped on the second last step. One of Renata's guests, a woman in a cream blazer who smelled of expensive perfume, glanced up with mild curiosity, the way a person glances at a painting they have already dismissed. Is Papa settled? Renata asked. The Papa was new. She had never called Edmund that in front of Claudine before. It landed like a small claim of ownership. Mr. Voss is resting comfortably, Claudine said. He had a good morning. Renata's expression shifted. Something too composed, too careful. Good, then you won't be needed upstairs for a while. She looked at the pitcher in Claudine's hand. Can you take that to the kitchen? We're short-staffed. Claudine looked at the pitcher, then at Renata. I'll bring it to the kitchen on my way, she said evenly. I need to check his medication chart at 1 o'clock. I'm sure that can wait. It can't actually. The word actually landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Renata's guest glanced from one woman to the other. The second guest, a man in a gray blazer, suddenly became very interested in the print on the wall behind him. Renata stepped closer. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to make the space feel smaller. We have guests, she said, soft and clipped. This isn't the moment for you to decide what can and can't wait. Claudine did not step back. She had not planned anything. She had not come into this house with a speech prepared or a line she intended to hold, but she had been swallowing corrections and small diminishments for 3 weeks. And she was a registered medical professional, standing in front of a woman who was asking her to delay a patient's medication in order to carry a pitcher to the kitchen, and her body simply decided it had reached the end of something. Miss Harbert. Renata said her name the way you say a word you wish didn't exist. I would appreciate if you would remember that you are a guest in this home as well. A temporary guest. I'm not a guest, Claudine said. Her voice was very quiet. I'm Edmund Voss's nurse. That's different. The hallway at the base of the stairs had 3 more people in it now. A caterer's assistant who had frozen mid-step. An older woman Claudine recognized as one of the board members who had arrived early and was holding a glass of sparkling water she had clearly forgotten about. And Philip Voss, who had appeared in the doorway to the sitting room, and was watching with the expression of a man who has just realized the conversation he's been overhearing is not the one he thought it was. Renata's voice dropped lower. You have been treating this position as though you have some kind of authority in this family's home. You do not. Claudine set the pitcher down on the step beside her, carefully, as if the gesture had a meaning she wanted everyone to understand. I have authority over one thing, she said. His care. That's what I was hired for. That's what I'm here to protect. Renata let out a breath that was nearly a laugh. Protect. She said the word back slowly. From what exactly? Claudine looked at her, not with anger, not with the satisfaction of someone who has found a trap, with something steadier than either of those things. From decisions being made about him by people who aren't thinking about his health. The sitting room doorway was fully framed by Philip now. He had one hand on the door frame. He was not moving. Renata's face went through something complex and fast, and when it settled it had chosen rage. You are completely out of line, she said. You are a nurse, you come in, you do your job and you leave. You do not speak to me about decisions in my own home. You do not tell me what this family is or is not thinking about. And you will not stand there on my staircase and imply. I'm not implying anything, Claudine said. I changed your father-in-law's medication order back 3 times this week. Each time I said nothing. But if I don't say something now, and something happens to him, that silence becomes mine to carry. The room went the particular kind of quiet that happens when something true has been spoken in front of people who weren't supposed to hear it. Renata stared at her. Philip said quietly from the doorway. You changed his medications? Renata turned. Philip, you changed the order he takes them? His voice was not loud, but something in it had shifted. Something had come online that had been off for a very long time. I adjusted them. For efficiency. The doctor's schedule is not always practical. The doctor's schedule exists because one of those medications affects his heart rhythm if taken without food. Claudine spoke without moving from the step. I documented each change and each correction in his care notes. Everything is dated. The older woman with the sparkling water lowered her glass very slowly. Philip looked at Renata. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Claudine. Is he all right? Right now, is he all right? He's resting well. His morning was difficult, but he's stable. His 1 o'clock medication needs to be given with lunch, which is why I need to go upstairs at 1. Philip nodded once, then go. Renata said Philip. He looked at her again. Whatever he saw made him very still. We'll talk later. Claudine picked up the pitcher from the step. She walked past Renata, not around her. There were perhaps 6 inches between them as she passed, and she did not shrink into them. She walked at her own pace with her own posture, and she went upstairs. Behind her no one spoke for several seconds. Edmund was awake when she came in. He was looking out the window at the garden, where the last of the season's leaves were releasing from the oak trees in slow intervals. How's the circus? He asked. Busy, she said. He made a low sound that was almost a laugh. Renata's upset. It wasn't a question. Claudine poured fresh water, checked his chart, began setting out his lunch tray with his noon medications on the side. People get upset, she said. Edmund turned from the window. He was watching her with those dark, clear eyes that saw more than people gave him credit for. She moved my pills again, didn't she? Last Tuesday, he said. I'm old, not unobservant. I saw you fix them. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make a fuss. But I saw Claudine put down the medication cup. Yes, she said. She moved them. He looked back out the window. You put them right. Every time. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in a voice so mild it almost disguised what it carried. I want you to know that I know that and I'm grateful. Claudine looked at him and felt the back of her throat do something she had not expected. She had cared for many patients. She had been thanked many times. But there was something about being seen by someone who had every reason to look elsewhere. Someone everyone expected to be absorbed only in their own difficulty. And to have him say, clearly, I know what you did. She straightened the lunch tray. You're my patient, she said. It's what I'm here for. It's more than that, he said simply. And you know it. She did know it. But she didn't say so. She handed him his water and his first pill, and they were quiet together while the oak tree gave up its last leaves to the afternoon. Downstairs the luncheon had reorganized itself around an absence. Renata was at the table, performing composure with the precision of someone who has had a great deal of practice. Philip had not sat down yet. He was standing near the sideboard with his coffee going cold in his hand and his eyes somewhere past the window. The guests talked. The caterers moved. The afternoon light came through the tall windows at its November angle. Low and pale, catching the crystal in the silverware and making everything look like it had been preserved in something. Two of the guests had been in the hallway. They had heard everything. A woman named Patricia Good, who sat on the same charitable board as Renata and had known Edmund Voss since his working years, excused herself from the table at 1:30, climbed the stairs, knocked lightly on Edmund's door and put her head in. Is this a bad time? She asked Claudine. Come in, Edmund said. Please, save me from the quiet. Patricia came in and sat in the chair beside his bed. She looked at Claudine. I heard what happened downstairs, she said. Not an apology, just an acknowledgement that she had been there and had seen. Claudine said, it's handled, is it? Patricia looked at Edmund. Did you know she's been going behind your nurse's decisions? The medications? Edmund sighed. I suspected. I didn't know the details. Patricia folded her hands in her lap. She looked like a woman who had been choosing silence for a very long time and had just gotten tired of the weight of it. Philip should know, she said. Philip does know, Claudine said. He heard the conversation. Patricia was quiet for a moment, then good. She looked at Edmund. You have good people taking care of you? Edmund smiled. One at least. Downstairs, the luncheon ended before 3. People left in small groups, subdued in the way people become when a gathering has shown them something they weren't prepared for. Philip found Claudine near the back of the house, where she was washing her hands before beginning Edmund's late afternoon check. He stood in the doorway of the small washroom, and he looked like a man who had been doing difficult arithmetic all afternoon and had finally arrived at an answer he didn't like. How long has this been going on? He asked. The medication. 3 weeks. Since I arrived. He pressed his hand against the doorframe. She never told me she was adjusting his schedule. I documented it. Everything is in his care binder. Each change, each correction, the date and time. I'd like to review that, of course. He was quiet for a moment. Did she say anything to you before today? About your role here? About how she expected things to go? Claudine dried her hands. She thought about how to answer that in a way that was truthful without being the kind of truthful that builds walls out of grievance. She made her expectations clear, Claudine said. Philip nodded slowly. I'm sorry, he said. That's not nothing. I know that. It was not nothing. She had spent 3 weeks being made to feel like a disruption in someone else's house, and she had handled it by doing her job so precisely and so quietly that no one could call her on it. She had been protecting Edmund while also daily protecting herself from the cost of speaking up. Your father is a good man, she said. He's my priority. Philip looked at her. I'd like you to stay if you're willing. Claudine held his gaze for a moment. That depends on whether the circumstances change. It was a fair thing to say, he knew it. They'll change, he said. He went to find Renata. Claudine did not hear that conversation, she did not try to. She went upstairs to check Edmund's vitals, helped him with his afternoon tea, and sat with him while he told her about the summers his family used to spend at a lake in the Laurentians when he and his brother were young. He had a brother named Alec, 2 years younger. Alec had died in his 40s, unexpectedly. Edmund had never fully made peace with the shape that left in him. We didn't talk enough, Edmund said. I kept thinking there was more time. Claudine listened the way she had learned to listen. Not to fill space but to hold it. I have a sister, she said after a while. We didn't talk for 6 years. Edmund looked at her. What happened? I said something honest at the wrong moment, and now we talk on Sundays every week. I'm the one who called first. Edmund thought about that. You called first. She wasn't going to. And I needed the relationship more than I needed to be the one who was right. He was quiet for a long time, then he said, That's harder than it sounds. Yes, she said. It is. The maple outside his window had gone bare now in the November dusk, its branches reaching upward into a sky that was turning the particular blue-gray of late autumn in Ontario. Inside, the lamp beside Edmund's bed cast a warm circle of light that reached just far enough to hold both of them in it. What happened after, Claudine only learned in pieces, the way you learn most important things. Philip had gone to Renata and had shown her the care binder, all 3 weeks of it. The dates, the corrections, the clinical notes written in Claudine's even careful hand. Renata had looked at it for a long time without speaking. She had known when she moved those pills that she was overriding someone else's professional judgment. She had told herself it was minor. She had told herself she knew Edmund's routines, knew his preferences, knew this house. She had not told herself the real thing, which was that she had never liked the fact of another woman having authority in her home. Even an authority as bounded and specific as the authority of a nurse over a patient's medical schedule. The binder made it concrete in a way her own thinking had not. Philip had not shouted. He was not a man who shouted. He had sat across from her at the kitchen table while the caterers packed up in the next room, and he had said very quietly that what she had done was serious. That Edmund's heart medication was not a detail. That the woman she had been treating like an inconvenience had, 3 times, prevented a potential crisis without making a scene, without threatening to leave, without involving anyone except the patient she was there to protect. Renata had said, "I didn't know it was that serious." Philip had said, "You didn't ask." That was the thing she couldn't undo, not the action, the not asking. The assumption that her own instinct was sufficient, that the nurse with 22 years of experience was an employee who could be redirected without consequence. She had sat with that for a long time. 2 days later, on a Monday morning, Renata knocked on Edmund's door. He was awake, sitting up, reading his newspaper in the way he did, glasses low on his nose, the paper held at the angle that made his left arm ache less. Claudine was in the room. She did not leave when Renata came in. Renata did not ask her to. "I want to apologize," Renata said. She looked at Edmund first. "For the medication schedule. I didn't understand what I was changing." Edmund lowered his newspaper. He looked at her with an expression that was patient and complicated. "You should apologize to her," he said. "A beat." Renata looked at Claudine. Something in the look was not easy. It was not comfortable or graceful, but it was real. "I treated you like you weren't qualified to make decisions about his care," she said. You are. I'm sorry for that." Claudine held her gaze for a moment. She thought about the first morning, the look that had catalogued her in the doorway. She thought about the third person. She has moved his chair again. She has opinions. She thought about 3 weeks of putting those pills back in order in the early mornings before Edmund woke, and the particular loneliness of doing the right thing in a house where the right thing was being made to feel like an imposition. She also thought about the voice of a woman she knew, her sister, telling her once that the strongest thing a person can do is refuse to let bitterness in, even when it's been earned. "I appreciate that," Claudine said. "Thank you." Not forgiven, not fixed, not pretended away, but acknowledged by both of them, in front of the man they had both, in their different ways, been trying to take care of. Edmund put his newspaper down. "Good," he said. "Now someone make me a decent cup of tea, because the hospital sent me home with an aversion to that lukewarm nonsense, and I'm beginning to think it's permanent." Renata almost smiled. It was not a full smile. It was the beginning of one. Claudine went to put the kettle on. The weeks after that were different. Not repaired, not uncomplicated, but different. Renata stopped redirecting Claudine's clinical decisions. She stopped the third person. She stopped leaving the room 2 beats too quickly whenever Claudine came in. She did not become warm. Warmth was not something that could be manufactured from an apology, and Claudine did not need it. What she needed was to be able to do her job, and she could. Edmund improved, in the way people improve after strokes when they are given the time and the steady, patient attention that allows the brain to rebuild its pathways. His left hand steadied. His morning confusion became infrequent. He began telling stories that ran long and wound back on themselves, and required Claudine to follow the thread, while she was taking his blood pressure or checking his oxygen. And she learned to do both things at once, to listen to the Laurentians, and watch the numbers and know them both equally. Philip began stopping in on his way to work in the mornings. Not to oversee. Just to sit with his father for 10 minutes with a coffee, in the way that people sometimes start doing things they should have been doing all along, once something has shown them the cost of not doing them. One morning in late November, Edmund asked Claudine if she had called her sister recently. "Last Sunday," she said. "Good." He handed back the blood pressure cuff. "Was it a good call?" "She told me her daughter lost her first tooth." He made the sound that was nearly a laugh. "And you'll call again next Sunday?" "I will." He looked out the window at the winter garden, dormant now, the rose beds cut back, the ornamental grass standing in dry silver tufts. "I'm going to call Alec's son," he said. "Nephew I haven't spoken to in 4 years, some disagreement about the estate when Alec died. Stupid, the way those things usually are." Claudine said nothing. She did not need to. "There's more time than I was given to believe, maybe," Edmund said, "or less, but either way," she agreed. He picked up his newspaper. She gathered her things. Outside, the first real snow of the season was beginning to fall on the quiet street, on the bare maples, On the long lane where she had arrived 6 weeks ago with her canvas bag and her color-coded folder, and the 22 years of steadiness she had built, without ever being sure anyone was paying attention. Someone had been. And in the end that was enough to keep the candle lit.